Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. We turn to a little poem number 207 in the Johnson edition, Though I Get Home, How Late, How Late. Here we have another poem about journeys, and in fact, when this poem was published in 1891, it was titled The Return. Now, one of the debates about so many of these poems is that it isn't clear who Emily is often referencing in the poem. And guys, like we said, just because there's a first person pronoun doesn't necessarily mean that the speaker of the poem is Emily. For example, some have read this poem as a speaker who travels the world. Clearly not Emily, maybe somebody like Sam Boyles who has spent some time in Europe. Others have read this poem as, no, the speaker of this poem is actually Emily, but the journey that she's talking about is, of course, the journey to the afterlife and to heaven. We're going to be able to deduce different types of interpretations here on the word choices alone. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked with our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've already worked with our preceding 206 poems. We just finished with The Flower Must Not Blame the Bee. Now, I enjoy the way in which Emily plays the game of ambiguity in her poems. I mean, we've said this before. You got to learn to embrace the ambiguity if you're going to read Emily Dickinson. It can't bug you. Of course, we're back to Homer. And so much of Homer's Odyssey stands behind, I believe, a whole lot of what Emily's doing and the games that she's playing. That is to say, Homer will leave Ithaca for 20 years and then finally come back to discover what? Well, lots has changed, right? Lots has changed. We'll see. Though I get home, how late, so I get home, 'twill compensate, better will be the ecstasy that they have done expecting me, when night descending dumb and dark, they hear my unexpected knock. Transporting must the moment be, brewed from decades of agony. To think just how the fire will burn, just how long cheated eyes will turn, to wonder what myself will say, and what itself will say to me, beguiles the centuries of way. Now, I love this poem because this poem can easily be read where the speaker of the poem is Odysseus or Ulysses. And it works really well. I mean, we've given full lectures at LearnStrong.net of the Odyssey, all books. And if you're unfamiliar with the Odyssey, you can go back and run that study to ground. It has to be the case that a number of times the traveler Odysseus, longing to get home, will in fact take to heart the question, what will it be like when I arrive? Of course, we know what it's like, both comic and tragic, at the end of the Odyssey, in the way in which Odysseus gets his justice served cold, we might say. Notice here for Emily, it's not clear if it's Emily herself or it's some traveler. Of course, the irony is that Emily didn't travel much, and so if you read this poem as lots of traveling and then wondering what it's like to go home, and it's Emily, well then obviously we've got some challenges because she didn't travel a lot, other than obviously in her mind and through her writing. Though I get home, how late, notice the repetition. It takes us back to poem 205 and the repetition that was happening there. How late, so I get home. In other words, it may take me a while to get home, but at least I get home. Some have read, of course, home as heaven. And if you read home as heaven, it's different than reading it as Amherst, if you're talking about Emily the speaker. Just to get home will be compensation enough. Better will be the ecstasy. She loves this word. 27 poems she uses this word, including this poem. And, of course, a few lines later it will be transporting. Better will be the ecstasy that they, and again it's not clear who the they is, those left back home, have done expecting me. Now if you read this poem, as many love to, as the musings of Ulysses or Odysseus, then obviously it's Penelope more particularly that will be, when night descending dumb and dark, they hear my unexpected knock. Now of course Odysseus himself doesn't do that. He shows up unannounced and shows up incognito, as we know. Transporting must the moment be. So we go from ecstasy to transporting. Must the moment be. Now obviously transporting for both parties. And I think that's one of the compelling things about this poem, is that Emily sees both sides of the traveling and return equation. Yes, there is the traveler, there's those left behind. Upon return, both of them will enjoy a certain kind of ecstasy in transporting, right? Notice, all of this moment has been brewed, it's a fascinating word, right? From decades of agony. I think she used the word brew intentionally. I think that in the back of her mind there is the Odyssey, and her close reading of the Odyssey, as we commented in our lectures. Remember how we said so much about eating and drinking as being central to one of the motifs there? So she uses the word brew. It's brilliant to me. Decades of agony. And to me, this is why reading this as the Odyssey makes sense, because it is decades of agony. Or any of those famous epics of journey. I think Standing There is as well, possibly Dante's Divine Commedia, the journey of Dante the Pilgrim, and maybe even Milton's Paradise Lost, a text that she loved as well. Notice then we break and we go to think. And it's interesting, this phrase, to think. It's like a thought experiment. Just, notice used twice, just how the fire will burn. And again, that idea of the hearth that is so central to Homer and to our reading of Homer, as we commented it, in earlier lectures, will burn. Just how long cheated eyes, and again, this long cheated is, it's a Penelope read for me. Long cheated eyes will turn to wonder what myself will say. Again, it's this kind of thought experiment upon coming back from being gone for decades of agony. What is it that you say? And it is interesting to study the Odyssey and to see the ways in which Odysseus doesn't have a lot to say initially. You'll remember, he's quite quiet actually, and he's an observer, isn't he? Of course, when he does use language, it's usually pretty direct. And what itself, to finish, it will say to me. Now, it's interesting that it is removed, notice, from the plural of they to the singular of itself. And it isn't clear if we're talking about loved ones or we're talking about the traveler himself here, and what itself will say to me. Is the speaker here talking about the other, or rather the self? In other words, I'm going to have a conversation with myself. We know that Odysseus played this game for sure. And then to finish with beguiles as opposed to brood. It's beautiful that both the words carry, think about the way beguiled is a central word in our reading of the Odyssey and of Odysseus, right? And of course, Dante makes those comments about it is the beguiling nature of Odysseus that ultimately lands him in Dante's Inferno. Instead of it being decades of agony, now it's centuries of way. Now, of course, this last word with the exclamation point makes us think about a way, as in one word, or a space way. That is to say, an Odyssey. And I think the game that's being played here at 2A is that homecomings are always a certain kind of transporting to both the traveler as well as those to whom one is returning. At 2B, well, I think it's a brilliant poem because it's not totally clear how one is to read this poem. Yes, it can be Emily, who is journeying to heaven, and those who have already gone before her will welcome her after her, her agony, and of course, not just agony, but as well the centuries of way, right? The life that maybe is hard. At 3A, well, I think again, standing behind this are all the what I'll just call epics of travel, right? The journey epics. Now, obviously, you can play the Homer, the Dante, the Milton game. You can play a game more recent with a text like Life of Pi. We've given some comments, Learn Strong on this classic traveling novel as well. Finally, at 3B, what for you is the most important journey of your life? It obviously is going to involve some agony, some challenges, and a return. Whatever that journey is that you've decided to write down at 3B, how did it change you? How did it change those to whom you're returning? And somehow or another, is Emily helping you along your journey? I hope so. Thank you.